Welcome to Still Growing in Grace, a program dedicated to inspiring joy, giving hope, and delighting in grace. I'm Mike Zenker, and I'll be sharing with you a message of hope that will expand your understanding of God's love and amazing grace. God already deeply loves you, totally accepts you, and really, really likes you. Growing in Grace Ministries Canada and Hope Fellowship, your community church, invite you to enjoy today's program as we dig deeper into what it means to be still growing in grace. I almost forgot what I was hoping to talk about, but you've written a whole bunch of stuff recently and it's gone all over the place. So I had been having discussions with Bill Thrasher about the will of God. And if that's a good topic, great. Or talk about how does prayer work right now? Or how do we visit this, all these tensions in our society right now? And find calm and peace, I don't know. What's your heart? Where are you at? Like, can we just start right here, like now, and just begin talking about all this?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the will of God is always, I'm always up for that, because what else is there, and, how
about misunderstandings? That's what there is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what else is there to aspire to, and, I think when we prioritize the will, and recognize that, he's wanting a personal interaction with us, and he's wanting to guide us. He's wanting to help us. But the thing is, he doesn't force it on us, and he doesn't coerce it, and he doesn't manipulate us. And when we take those elements out of the divine nature, coercion, manipulation, control, what God looks like is very different than what we've been told he would look like. We've been told he would look like a Zeus, a controlling Zeus,
yep.
Who would hurl thunderbolts if you displease him, and who speaks with a baritone voice. Well, God speaks mainly to me anyway, with yeah. Which every now and then is okay. But no, just that he speaks to me through impulses and promptings, and speaks to me non-verbally. I think when I sort of purged myself of the idea that he speaks verbally, I've said this before, but I think God is slumming when he uses human language.
He's in our head. Okay, he's thinking our thoughts as if it's us.
Yeah. And I think that when I feel like I have an impulse or a prompting is the word I like, because
I like that.
I just feel something in me speaking to me. Then I can process it, and I don't need to process it verbally. I can process it viscerally, with my gut, and emotionally with my heart, and then, try to give some honor to it through an intellectual expression of it. But it's got to start down, for me anyway. It starts in the gut and the heart realm, and then the best we can do is try to convey it in a way that doesn't pollute it, when we use words to it, and that's why. No, go ahead.
You mentioned some of if you peel back some of these things, and you made a small list, are false concepts of what we think the will of God is, because maybe there's some underlying things we believe the will of God is that we never talk about, like maybe some myths that are in the punch, and we got to remove it before we can actually see clearly.
Absolutely. And I think the whole concept of the law of being legalistic, we've all reduced God to etchings in stone, or writings on parchment. And not that those things can't bless, but if we don't learn how to read them with a loose grip and understand the malleability of language, and that words, Chesterton, I shared a quote from Chesterton the other week that's so good, that just says, look, man, paraphrasing, but he says, look, man, you can't, you've got to acknowledge that words are unreliable. They're slippery. They slip, they slide, they bend. And once you do that, it's like playing with a tennis racket. Once you hold it with a loose grip, that the pros will tell you, over gripping causes all sorts of problems, and we over grip language. And I think
especially in the West,
when you loosen that grip and allow, yes, absolutely. And, the kind of the word that I'm into these days is visceral, which means, basically means your gut. It's something that's natural. It's innate in you. It's in your core. It's something without having to express it. It's a gut level understanding of things. And I've always believed that, Jesus believed those apostles because they were all visceral guys. They were fishermen, they were rough, they were coarse, but, dear God, what they believed, they believed, and they were, there wasn't, they weren't necessarily eloquent. I'm not saying they weren't eloquent, but I mean, they were people that lived out of their gut. And I think, and Jesus said, out of our bellies flow these rivers of living water. There's something, and I wrote something the other day. I shared something on that, on the realm of the gut, how so much of the scripture is translated. The terms really mean gut, phreneo and the kidneys. In your kidneys will instruct you in the Old Testament. And then to be spiritually minded is death. That's actually that. Yeah, there's all sorts. If you do a concordance search on the word kidneys and reins, which really mean the same thing, kidneys and reins, the Hebrews believe that really we hear God at the center of our being, and they would associate the center of our being with our gut or with our kidneys, and it was there that we would interact with the touch point. There were certain touch points. And I'm not saying the Lord can't touch our thoughts. Sure, he can. But there seems to be primary touch points where the Lord percolates within us. And the gut is one. And that Corinthians passage that says to be spiritually minded, that word is actually phreneo, and it has to do with your belly cavity. To be gut minded is life.
I'm just laughing because,
of course, I know
now we're gut minded. I'm thinking of the size of my gut, trying to protect the six pack. Yeah.
Well, we all have a six pack in the spirit realm.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
But I mean, I think it lets loose of our blind allegiance to reason. We want to reason things out, and God is so much more than reason. And I'm not saying that reason doesn't have a place, at the council table, but the problem with reason is it wants to have the head place. It wants to have the head chair at the council. Whereas we need these other things, intuition and emotional intelligence and visceral intelligence. And there's a term, abductive thinking. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but there's inductive thinking, then there's deductive thinking. Abductive thinking is a term that they've put to intuition. And Einstein said that intuition, he didn't discover any of his discoveries through reason. He used intuition. And if you go back and you look at some of the great scientists in history will say the same thing. They would use thought experiments, and they would just be a gut inkling. I'm not saying all those things are from the Lord, but I do think it opens a realm for us that we need to be sensitive to. And we need, our gut is, as long as our gut is sanctified, if we're living out of fear and discouragement, then you can't really trust anything you're hearing.
No.
but when you hear your gut and you feel, God's a God of encouragement. He's not a God of discouragement. That's one of the best things that one of my good friends, Lauren Carter, told me, and it's all he would ever say. He would listen to anything and he would say, well, God's a God of encouragement, not discouragement. And that, to me, identifies how you filter your impulses. If you're having a prompting from the Lord, if it's one of encouragement, it's from Jesus. If it's one of discouragement, it's from the enemy. However you might define your enemy, whether it's your own carnality or whether it's the devil or both, some combination of both. But and I would say this, I was thinking the other day, Mike, about how if I had to describe Jesus in one way, how would I describe him? And I would have to say this, it's when he says that my burden is light, my yoke is light. And that I would say whenever I know that I'm connecting with Jesus, I feel such a lightness of being.
There's peace.
And by lightness,
peace is another good word.
Yes. And it's like, you're way down, you're way down with whatever your fears and your discouragements are. But when you're interacting with him, you just straighten up. Your spirit man straightens up and your thoughts straighten up. And then the whole world looks different. And he's the Lord of light in the sense of visual light, but he's also the Lord of lightness in that, he gives us this exoskeleton that, that we can walk through all these trials. And I've realized that, that if I'm not operating in lightness or in light, then I need to just kind of stop, Selah, wait, pause, and consider, and get back into the divine nature that he's put in me. And so I think the counterfeits are pretty easy pretty easy to, when you're giving a counterfeit impulse as something that's from the Lord. I think if we're honest with ourselves, it's pretty easy to say, well, that's really me saying that, or that's my resentment saying that, or that's my self-justification saying that, or that's my pleasing another man.
Unless you've got a pride issue and you're trying to use "God told me so" to power trip somebody. That's where things get really crazy, and I'm getting real tired of it. God told me.
And I'm not even sure if God did tell us so, that we should say God told us so.
I agree.
Because I think
it's too loose.
Because that's a tool, that's a psychological tool that we can use without even intending it. Yeah. But I mean, we don't need to say it. I mean, Jesus didn't go around saying, "Thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord."
That's a good example. You're right.
I mean, he just went around speaking, and Paul was the same way. And, sometimes Paul would say, well, I speak the truth to you. I'm not lying in Christ, but I think that we need to develop confidence in our own ability to hear these promptings and if we miss it, we miss it. Sometimes we do miss the boat, and sometimes that prompting maybe didn't lead us into goodness and into light. But you know what? We just need to be, if we keep our ego in check and just say, well, no one can hear God for us. I was thinking, somebody posted something about Paul not choosing God on the road to Damascus. And I really didn't like it because, you know what? Paul had already been struggling. He said that it's hard for you to kick against the goads. The Lord said that to Paul in his later recounting of it. He was struggling. His conscience, the thing is, God knows when our conscience is crying out for. And when our conscience is crying out to receive him, then we're ready to receive it. So I'm not saying it's a free will choice, but I'm not saying that we have to be receptive. There has to be a receptivity in us that really begins before the event ever occurs. I know when I found the Lord, no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just saying when I first came to the Lord, and Rita and I did, we were separated. And I'll be the first, and that was way back in 1988, and I will tell you that, I had already been wrestling in frustration with reality and feeling sad and heartbroken, and we were separated. And, the way that we came to the Lord is, that we decided for some inexplicable reason to go to this Sunday school. I had an attorney friend who invited us to go to a Sunday school class, and he knew we were separated.
Do they still have that?
We didn't go. We didn't go to well, back then they did. We didn't go to the Sunday school class, but we went to church. Well, we sat through this church, and I really didn't understand anything that was going on. I mean, I wasn't raised a Christian. I mean, my granddad was a Baptist preacher, and I'd been to some of his stuff, but we didn't know what was going on. But at the end of it, the pastor said, "This is our music minister's anniversary. So if you want to write down a well-wishing for him," they pass around sheets of paper, or if you have a prayer request, write down a prayer request. Well, I wrote down something desperate.
Wow.
Just huff. I don't know what's going on in my life. It's something desperate. And I didn't know what my wife wrote. But we've been separated for 6 months, and we turned it in. Well, the next day the pastor calls me, and he said, "Would you like to go out to lunch with me at Cracker Barrel?" And I said, "Sure." So we went to Cracker Barrel restaurant. I don't know if you know what Cracker Barrel is. If y'all have,
I used to live in Fort Erie by Buffalo, so there wasn't across the border.
Okay. So we went there, and he listened to me and just kept nodding his head as I was sharing, all the stuff that was going on. And then we went out in his car in the parking lot, and he led me to the Lord. Okay. Wow. And I sat there, and when that happened, I was like, I didn't feel anything, but I said, sure, why not? I want this. I know my life is miserable. And I'd been into all sorts of Eastern stuff and New Age stuff and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, here I was at the end of my rope. And so I said yes. And so anyway, I'm numb for 3 days. I don't really feel anything. I don't really feel a difference. But then that following weekend, I'm going to pick up my son in Alabama. And when I'm driving over to Alabama, I'm driving along this mountain ridge. It's called Taylor's Ridge. And when I was driving along that ridge, I felt the Lord's presence for the first time in my life.
Wow.
And he just, and I felt like this could all be true. I didn't even have the faith to say, I knew it was true at that point. I just said, this could all be true. Everything I prayed and everything I believed in. So I just had a massive transformation on that drive. And then I come to find out later that the pastor called my wife the next day went out with her and led her to the Lord. And we did, but he didn't want us to tell each other. So I come back from that trip to Alabama, just telling my wife this, that, and the other. We've got to, I love you. Let's make this work. Let's let the Lord help us. And she tells me she had received the Lord. Wow. So you'll never be able to tell me that there wasn't, there wasn't supernatural preparation for all that was going on. We were at our wits' end and our heart's end. And the Lord intervened in this with wisdom. And, that wasn't a church that we could stay at ultimately, but it was, so many things in the Lord gives us. It's like a connect the dots. This is your first dot. I'm going to lead you to greener and greener and greener and greener fields, just like I'm going to work in their lives. And it wasn't a church where we could stay at, but it was a church to get us started. And it was a church that loved us and ministered to us. And of course, but anyway, I mean, that all that by way of saying that I do think, he doesn't hit us out of the blue. I think our consciences are working. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't even know what our conscience is wanting. But if our conscience wants the Lord, then sometimes he fills in our mind later, and say, well, you really want this. You just don't know you want it.
I think God's really good at what he does.
That's yeah, he's very skilled. Well, and you know what? That's an important thing too. To recognize the abilities of God, and to put faith in his abilities.
Well, here's a funny one. Like I hear constantly, like I've been a pastor for 30 years, youth pastor for many years. And I always hear parents say, please pray for my child, or pray for my husband, or pray, or whatever, pray for my spouse who doesn't know the Lord, and they're trying to get them saved. It's like, wait a minute. Do you not trust God? Like, is he not big enough to get their attention his way? Did God not get your attention at age 28 when you didn't hear anything about God? If he can do that for you, he can totally get a hold of your kid. Amen. Quit rushing it. Amen. He doesn't need your help. So I encourage people to stop trying.
And I think that there's a part of that where you consciously commit the person to the Lord. Yeah. You actually turn the care of it over to the Lord. And that's hard to do as a parent.
Well, because you're letting go of control.
You agonize. Yeah, it is.
Perceived control.
Which tells us that our control can often provide friction rather than lubrication, to the spirit. So, that's why I think sometimes, with the Abraham and Isaac story, that a lot of that story is about him forsaking control, that he was leading Abraham to a place where I'm in control what's going on here. And I'm going to turn Isaac over to you, and I'm going to trust him with you. And then, when that happened, then Abraham was able to start, because he was misconstruing things left and right. Oh, you want me to kill him? And the Lord said, no, I want you to sacrifice him. I want you to give him to me. I want you to commit him to me. And then when Abraham was thinking, well, that means I got to kill him. The angel, he said, send an angel down there and tell Abraham, no, that's not what I want. All right. I want you to turn him over. And just like Jesus, when Jesus said, if you love son and daughter more than me, that means we're controlling it, even though it sounds good. Well, I love my son more than I love God. No, what it means is you love your control of your son more than you love God. So as we yield these things over to him, then that actually invites the Spirit in. And it doesn't mean the Spirit's never going to come in and coerce our loved ones to come to him, but we need to provide as little friction to it as possible, and then just yield our prayers to it, and then behold the Lord's abilities.
Yeah, it's like the story of a mom praying for her adult child over and over and over. Lord, I put tracks in his lunch. I pray for him. I bring him. Please remove whatever's hindering him from knowing you. And poof, she disappears. Like
I haven't heard that. That's good.
It's just crazy how people come to an idea.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. So we have a delay, so it's okay. Keep going.
Okay. Well, it's just fear-based. I mean, it's just fear-based. We operate out of fear without realizing it, especially in a time like this, which I know is on your heart. How do people deal with the fear that's hovering around this whole thing? Mm-hmm. And we have to understand that what matters is what comes out of us, what drives us from within, and that fear, fear is not of God. I just don't believe it's of God. I never believe it's of God.
Can I hijack this?
Sure.
Because I'm hearing a lot of cheeky, trite comments from people about fear, that we're not supposed to fear the Lord and we're not supposed to fear this virus. And if we give into any fear, then we're giving into false thinking and not taking professional health and wisdom correctly. Like I think there's being a blurring of the lines of fear versus being honest about wash your hands because there's germs. Like I'm having a hard time with the mentality of this,
Sure.
And they just run off into their religious la-la land of la la la, no fear, no fear, no fear. It's not real, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you experienced?
Sure, absolutely.
How do you handle that?
Absolutely. Well, I think, I think that if you're hearing God, that you're going to not turn a blind eye. Paul said about take some wine for your stomach to Timothy. There are things that work in the natural. There are things that work in the supernatural. And I think we have to keep an eye on both. And if we keep an eye on only one, then we're going to become unbalanced. I mean, why wouldn't we? We understand the way that germs work, but we also understand that God has the ability, and Jesus frequently countermanded physics. He countermanded but we don't need to be presumptuous and think, well, I can do this because I'm going to presume that he does that. No, I mean, I'm telling you, if you want to know what's really been on my heart, Mike, it's been this idea that when we are weak, God is strong. All right. Paul's confession of weakness. And I posted something yesterday from the movie Paul the Apostle, which is the Apostle Paul, which is great. But there's a great dialogue in there where he says, the Roman prefect is trying to tell him, you did these miracles, and he said, I didn't do them, and he said, so the stories are false. No, they're true. And he said, well, how could that be? Because the Lord did them. I will boast. The only thing I boast in is my weakness. And I think when we start presuming things, I don't need to do this and I don't need to do that, and I'm not going to worry about that, and I'm not going to wear a mask, and I'm not going to do any of that. We're kind of sounding strong. We're boasting in our strength. I think that what we need to do is stay focused on our weakness, and then that magnetizes the power of God to come in there. But the minute we start boasting in it or thinking it's us, it's my faith doing this, it's my faith, I go back to the Beautiful Gate. I posted something on that the other day too, at the Beautiful Gate. John and Peter, they heal the guy. The guy is lame, and he shouts around the temple, dancing around the temple, and everyone. And then they look at the people that are astounded by it and say, why are you looking at us as if by our own holiness or by our faith we did this? We didn't do this. The Lord did this. And I think that keeps us from getting into what you're talking about. There's something in us that just thinks that we can just presume on the Lord for these, that I don't need protection, that I don't need to walk in wisdom, that I don't need to consider any earthly factors. And I think that even though that may be well intentioned, it gets us into that Peter mode of being
I'm realizing as you're saying this that even engaging in that conversation, you're creating a dualism. Someone's more right than the other. And I'm hearing myself right now, don't engage in that so much anymore. Like, quit trying to correct people that I'm frustrated with. Just hang on. That's not of the Spirit. So why feed it? So that's not light. So don't speak to something that's not light. Call to the light that you do know in them and speak to that light, and suddenly you're going to have a conversation that's meaningful. Amen. This just became really clear. Wow.
Yeah. And to have an invitational posture to where we're not demanding the Lord, or we're not telling the Lord what he's going to do. I mean, God, but we're inviting it. We have a posture of invitation to where when he does something or sends a prompting, we're soft enough to hear it, and we haven't already pre-hardened ourselves.
Yeah, which comes back to what the will of God is, and hearing it is when we're in that place of soft and quiet, not in the place of rebellion, fighting, tension, fear, all those things. Those are all the deflectors from sensing in your gut intuitively what is the will of God or who it is, right? I've always said Jesus is the will of God, for us. It's this connection, this oneness, this living from union.
Yes.
May not be a list. It may be presence, being, experiencing.
You know, that's you described it perfectly, because there's a German word, and I've written on this before, but it's Gelassenheit, and the German theologians came up with it. But I'm telling you, philosophers have used it. Luther used it. A whole bunch of German theology is pretty visceral. It can also be dangerous, but
of course, it's got phlegm in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. But that it's from the gut. But this word means letting be. You know, when Jesus said, "Let the glory of God be revealed," you know, when all these people were trying to pin down why the man was born blind, was it his sin? Was it his parents' sin? Yeah. Actually, what Jesus said in the Greek was neither. Nonetheless, let the glory of God be revealed. And so, Gelassenheit is a good alternative to this idea about free will. Which, getting back to that post we were talking about, that was obviously saying Paul didn't choose him. He didn't use his strength of will to choose. Totally agree with that. But Gelassenheit is less than a choice, but it's more than a passiveness. All right. Gelassenheit is this letting, this surrender of spirit, the surrender of soul, to where we say, yes, Lord. He's not going to he does stand at the door and knock, which implies we have to answer. But it's not a free will answer. Yes, it's a participatory thing. Well said. I wasn't going to say that, but that's better than what I was going to say. But letting him come in and letting interaction. Somebody asked me earlier today, what does it mean? You know, when Jesus said, "Depart from me, I never knew you," what did he mean by that? And I said, you know, and I hadn't thought about it in those exact terms, but as I meditated on it, it was like, you know, for the Hebrew mind, to know God is to experience God. You know, their word for knowledge means experiential knowledge. It doesn't mean head knowledge. It means experiential knowledge. So when Jesus said, I never knew you, you never let me in, we never interacted with each other. I was standing at the door and knocking, but you didn't open your door. But that doesn't mean he can't fix it now in this life or in the life to come. You know, that he's going to, because of his abilities that we spoke of earlier, because of his abilities, which is why I always say this: our faith needs to be in the abilities of God rather than in our abilities to misbehave.
Which is and where we get responsibility from. Our only responsibility is our ability to respond.
Yes, and when we try to mutate it into a choice and into a strength of will thing, then we're getting into these things, the bad things.
Well, I remember that I forget who I heard it from, but the idea of get away from me, I never knew you, is not so much about that saved and not saved, but rather the works you're doing them out of your own flesh, your own ego. Sure. You thought you were doing it to please me when that's not how I worked. And, I want nothing to do with that system, because you're doing it from a place of false concepts.
Sure. I absolutely agree. And also, all those verses can be taken to mean, Jesus wants to interact with us in this life. I think you and I probably both believe that he's gonna woo us and win us eventually.
He's good at it.
Rather it's in this life or the life to come. But this life is better. And I think we need to watch, we need to be careful not to, it's a serious thing. We have the opportunity to let him woo us and win us here and now. And we shouldn't rely on the post-mortem conversion to make it less important and less vital for us to share Jesus now and for us to interact with him now.
So where does the wooing take place? This is key, I think. I think this is really important for those that have grown up in the church. They think it's external. But my buddy Red Shoot, who I've had on this program many times, he has spoken about the voice in him. It spoke from the inside, Christ being the center of his life. He was told by pastors, you need to have Christ as the center of your life. And he's trying to figure out how to make Jesus center. And yet then he found out in a still small voice, a voice from his center spoke, and he responded. It was just, I'll never forget that story.
Well, I think what's not taught a lot about today is the human conscience. I don't know if you've ever seen much teaching on the conscience or not. Watchman Nee wrote a lot about it. But, when you look and see the times that Paul used the word conscience, my conscience bearing me witness in the Holy Ghost. Now, it does need to be a sanctified conscience and not a fear-based, because a lot of times, the voice, and I'm not even sure it's actually our conscience, but fear speaks to us, and dread and gloom and all that. And I don't believe that's from the Lord in any way, shape, or form. But I do know that when my conscience speaks to me, Origen, the church father, said that the conscience is the chamber of justice for the Lord.
Says the
that's
lawyer.
Where he declares. Yeah, but I like that chamber. I don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about the judge in that one. I know the judge is receptive.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about unreceptive judges versus receptive judges.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, I remember in Acts, there's a really cool line. I think it's Acts. I forget which one, but the question that was had arisen before that verse was read was, how many miracles did Jesus, the man, really do? And the answer is none. The man he did no miracles. It was God doing all these miracles through Christ. Which is kind of the lesson for us of abiding. Jesus, a number of times, I think 6 times, he said, it's not me doing this. It's not my words. My daddy told me what to say. He gave me the heads up. These are his words. And he's always giving credit. And he modeled the only what would Jesus do I can possibly see in Scripture: abided in the Father.
Yes. Well, and I remember years ago, I had this idea about what would Jesus do. There's only one answer to that. It's what you just said. He would hear the Father.
Yeah.
And so you can never say what would Jesus do in terms he would hear the Father and he would respond. And if he didn't hear anything, he wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And
which gives
I think that
which I think explains a couple points. One where Mama asks him to turn the water to wine. He said, "Mama, it's not my time." And a few minutes later, it is. And he's on the way to Bethany. "No, guys, go ahead. It's not my time." 10 minutes later, "Oh, now it is." So we're too much of a rush in our Western world to have that kind of slowdown.
Well, I think it comes back to the kenosis too, from Philippians.
That's what it is.
He emptied himself.
Yeah.
He emptied himself so that now, so he left, the thought is that, kenosis is that he emptied himself when he came to earth, and that he left certain divine attributes behind in heaven that he didn't operate in. He could have come down in his own power and healed all these people. He could have. It had it been another God with another value system, but he came down to model.
Is there a way to word that where he chose not to live out of his divinity, but rather out of his humanity? Because then it doesn't take away that he left something and there's something separate from him.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I think the concept is emptying, but you could certainly empty by him not tapping into it.
Yeah.
And you could argue that Satan was trying to get him to tap into it. During the temptations, use your soul. Don't wait for the Father. You have this power, and he refused to. He refused to tap into it. So sure, and but how much more so for us, emptying ourselves, and that's what we were talking about earlier with Paul, boasting in our weakness, and just I've been in this little bit of a debate with some people that I'm Facebook friends in, and they tend to claim that they're God. That they are everything that Jesus was. They are, and so I get into this idea that the apostles never boasted that they were God; they boasted that they weren't.
Bingo.
and I think that's good. That's a good thing for us to remember.
I think the pendulum has swung too far when you start speaking language that implies equality, as in separation. You are a God, as in, well, if you are, then get off the planet, create your own. If you really are, but instead to recognize our union, that is critical. I'm one with God. It's like in Star Wars, I'm one with the Force is one with me. I love that. I get it now. Because that's my identity. I'm one with the Anointed One. The Anointed One's one with me, but I'm not the Anointed One, even though I'm fused to him. Okay. Right. My identity is spirit. So to say I am now God, I think you're pushing unnecessary buttons that are not helpful. I just have a hard time with that.
No. And the history of people in the Bible who claimed godhood, it doesn't end well from Nebuchadnezzar to Lucifer, whoever we want to say he was. But I mean, and Herod, in the New Testament, I am God, I mean, these things don't end well. There's an old Eastern saying that I like. Now you have to adjust for it being an Eastern saying, but it says if you meet someone claiming to be Buddha on the road, kill them. All right. Well, the idea there, to me anyway, is at least anyone who would claim to be Buddha, anyone who was Buddha would never say it. All right. And so that if someone is claiming it, that's a sure sign that they're not.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how a lot of Buddhism thoughts,
even with Jesus.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you finish.
It's hard to know when you stopped and I've started once in a while, just depending on the bandwidth. But it's funny how some of the Buddhist sayings have a lot of parallels with the things Christ said. And where'd that come from? Could it have come from Daniel's days? You know, I read something that there could be some influence there. I don't know.
Well, you know, they the whole thing with the messianic secret too is that Jesus would often tell people not to tell people about his miracles. He would do a miracle for somebody.
That's true.
Say, don't tell anyone this. And I think
you're going to get me killed.
Yeah, well, either that or the idea is that this is between you and God. You know, this is just between you and God. All right. Don't run ahead. I know so many times I've tried to shoot my mouth off when God does something and I do it and it's not ripe. You know, I do it before the thing ripens. Not that I couldn't ever share it, but that
I hear it.
We need to let it settle down. We need to let the work do its work and trust. Again, all comes back to trusting in God's abilities. You know, the more that I know God, the more skilled he is. And, you know, the thing that really cured me of, you know, there was a time in my life when I got hooked up with this very legalistic cult. It was only for a year, but they were Old Testament and they were, you know, a former Word of Faith group that had broken off from Kenneth Hagin. And they operated in a power, just like Paul said, you know, the law has a power, but it fades. Right? The power of the law fades. Power of Jesus, you know, that glory faded. And what broke me free was a rhema word that I received and was able to articulate. And it was basically this: to have more faith in God's ability to deliver us than in our ability to destroy ourselves. And that made all the sense to me, that my faith had not been in God's ability to deliver us, but just in and that's what the law does. It points out your ability to destroy yourself, but it doesn't point out to God's ability to save you.
So let's wrap this up with this question. If you just made a really important point connected to the will of God, there are people wondering if they've missed the will of God, that they made the big mistake. I should have chosen this other person, or I should have taken that job, should have moved here, blah, blah, blah. You've just said something important there. How would you answer someone who is really or they're trying to make a decision, and how do I make the right choice? Right? Like that's a big question people have. How do you address that? I'm curious.
Well, I would just say that God is more concerned with our state of being than he is with our state of conduct. Okay. We tend to think the Lord's will is, let me have my checklist, my 5-point checklist for today about what I'm supposed to do. And that bypasses the whole idea that we're supposed to remain in the Sabbath rest of God. And there are times, you know, we all go through financial crises and things like that. And I've been through them. I'm sure we all have. But there are times when the Lord has really quickened to me that he's got it. All right. That he's watching out for me. And then when I take time to answer questions and do all this kind of stuff, that he attracts people to my, you know, to my practice. He attracts people. He's in charge of all that. Yeah. He leads people there. And my focus is on just being faithful in what's in my heart to do. And what mainly is in my heart to do, at least on a ministry level, is to declare his goodness and to give coherent explanations for his nature and
like
the problem of evil and that sort of thing. And if I focus on that, he's got everything else. And when I don't focus on it and I instead focus on the money aspect, it's like he's now not bringing clients. You know, it's like doing this enables his abilities to enter the situation. And so he's shown me time and time again that he's more concerned with my state of being, that if I'll handle that part of it, he'll handle the rest of it. And I may not know ahead of time how it's going to happen, but he's in control of it. And then, but when I take the reins, then obviously the great movie Bagger Vance. I don't know if you ever saw Bagger Vance, but that's a great movie for that. Will Smith playing the part of Jesus in that thing, that whenever Bagger, tried to play his way and with his motives, he wasn't able to help him, and his game deteriorated. But whenever he boasted in his weakness, then he became strong.
So backwards.
I think it's just trusting his abilities and knowing that our part is just letting his promptings percolate in us, and don't demand that they be, specific acts that you do
or certain outcome.
I think he is more concerned with our state of being, and from that state of being, things will start to occur to us just in the wake. Once our being is set, then the way is kind of clear, about what happens to us and what we're supposed to do. We want to put that first. That's the heart before the horse before the cart thing.
Yeah.
But when our being's in a good place with him, then things just occur. The way that for our betterment,
yep.
And even if it's a trial or a tribulation or whatever, I know that when he's with me and I'm in a good place with him, it doesn't matter how bad it looks. I feel peace. I feel his peace with me. And
well, there's an awareness issue, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if that's
the whole thing, really.
Absolutely. Like if we're so concerned and worried if, who's in control, which is sometimes a swear word in the Christian world right now. But God is actively participating in whatever event is going on. If you can't use the word control, use actively participating. Like, I'm sorry, but nothing ever occurs to God. Think about that.
Right.
He's actively involved. He sees beyond our dimensions, beyond our time and space. There's so much we don't know, and we can't create language to box God into something or demand an outcome by praying a certain way. We didn't realize we're trying to control stuff when we do certain things.
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is he's hovering around all of us. He's hovering, but some people make a distinction between his manifest presence versus his omnipresence. He's omnipresent everywhere. But for him to manifest, it depends largely on the receptivity of the people involved. And I'm not talking about the free will. I'm talking about the state of conscience, this state of heart.
Intentional awareness.
Or even prayer. Yeah, and he travels on prayers too. Wesley was famous for saying that he travels on the prayers of the saints. He's chosen to operate largely through prayers. All right, and we can roughly understand that now, but we can understand it greater later when all is known.
Yeah.
But
especially when he's especially when he's the source of the real prayer.
Yes. He prays. What is it? God hears prayers from us as God prays prayers through us. And that's that interactive circuit. That's a circuit of when we've let him in, and he shows us, he leads us how to pray. And we return the prayer to him, and and that breaks the circuit. And then the manifest presence, he's able to manifest more in a situation. And I've always looked at the concept of unfurling. The way a flag unfurls, the God's will is his kingdom will is furled up to a degree, and that the more we cooperate with it, the quicker it unfurls. Thus Peter says, hasten the day of the Lord. That means we can make the unfurling go quicker, but we can also add friction to it and keep it. But he's going to win. His abilities, no one can outlast him. So he's going to win. But why not cooperate now and enter the joy now and enter the Sabbath rest now? And especially in these days, enter the Sabbath rest of God, where we rest from our own works, we rest from our own control,
and opinions,
we rest from our own insistences, and then just yield to him and let him do exceedingly abundantly above everything we can ask or think, as Paul says in Ephesians.
I love it. I'd like to have another conversation sometime, if you got time, to talk about this prayer and meditation thing, because I think these two things tie together. In order to experience this, what we thought was the concern about the will of God really is about the deeper connection and awakening and learning to hear the voice and the presence, or the whisper, the wind of God in us, right? I don't know. I think you've written some stuff on it, and I'd love to explore that. And we're going to get Bill Thrasher in here too.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Bill and I are buddies.
Yeah, I've heard. Whoops. Yeah. Well, that'd be great. If you're game for that, I'd love that. But this was a good conversation. I've caught some things that was probably timely for me right now, where I saw things getting frustrating. I'm frustrated with some other believers, and now I'm realizing my eyes are on them. Shoot, that's Jesus just showed me you got your eyes on the wrong thing. This is good.
Yeah, well, I'm you know, we have stretched seasons where we're not doing it, and seasons where we do it, and you know, the quicker we can eliminate these seasons and recognition of it, you know, it's like the old when those guys sitting on the islands would have a chart of the enemy airplanes, and they would be like a shape of the enemy airplanes. You know, the more we learn this kind of stuff, the more we should be able to recognize it quickly when we're engaging in it. And so, wait a minute, that's the enemy.
Yes. But once in a while, we're too preoccupied to even notice.
Yes. But I'm happy, and I look forward to talking to you again, Mike.
That'd
I really
awesome.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up, and I'll bug Bill and see when he's available, and then we'll connect and do something soon, and find a time that works for all of our schedules. So.
Okay, sounds good, brother. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for the time, and you have a happy Thanksgiving. Ours is done. But we get to do it twice because we respect our fellow Americans, and we'll celebrate your Thanksgiving as well.
Well, thanks. I got some family coming in that I haven't seen in a while, so I'm excited.
That's awesome. All right. Have a good one then.
All right, man. You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Join me next time on Still Growing in Grace for more good news. Enjoy previous episodes by downloading our podcast at growingingrace.ca. You can also visit hopefellowshipycc.com to find our service times and location. If this show has been an encouragement to you, please consider making a donation today at growingingrace.ca and help us keep spreading this good news. Thank you again for tuning in to Still Growing in Grace.